What's going on, guys? Taking a quick look at this storm as it's stalled off the coast of Florida. I know you've all heard of it. Hurricane Dorian. It's been a record setter. Setting over the Bahamas now for going on 2 days. I had some reports on here. You're looking at this is a radar app that I use. It's not online. It is online, but it's an app you have to get. And I've got it as close to the hurricane as I can get. And if it's in this radar scope, there's a pretty good chance that this thing could come very close to the coast of Florida, because I have it configured to a Miami radar. Not that this thing's going to come near Miami, it's just that the Miami radar reached out far enough to include this hurricane. And the eye wall you can see up in the upper right hand corner starting to reveal itself. It's going through either a replacement cycle, what they call an eye wall replacement cycle, or it's beginning to show signs of weakening. Don't be fooled. This thing has went through an eye wall replacement before where it looked just like that, and it's entering still warm water, same as it's been in. So conditions are still good for a strong hurricane, whether it be a Cat 4, Cat 3, even a Category 2 storm. I don't know what it's going to be. It's anybody's guess at this point. Nobody expected it to be a high-end Category 5, really. Didn't surprise me after what it did down around Puerto Rico. We've been talking about hurricanes and the dust and things like that. Well, this storm was out ahead of the main dust plume, the SAL. It's called the Saharan Air Layer. This storm got just in front of the Saharan Air Layer. And I'll show you guys that here in a minute. But on this local radar here, this is out of actually Miami. KAMX is where I'm at. And their radar is showing the outer bands. It's showing the eye wall of the storm right there over the far western edge of the Bahamas. It's been sitting there now for many hours. In fact, I had some data on here earlier that since cycled off, there were many reports right here on the far western end of the Bahamas. I'm going to take you there here in just a minute on Google Earth, and it was indicating that many buildings and structures were washed away right here on the end. And I'm sure it's consistent all the way through the Bahamas with those same types of reports, as this storm has been incredibly strong, setting over the same area. We talked about it possibly forming new islands and quite possibly washing away others. Unbelievable. Showing some reports now down here around Hollywood, Florida, of rain. It's not showing how much, but just rain showers, as you can see from the rain bands, as the storm's close enough where these outer bands are reaching the coast. And there's no guarantee that this storm is going to go north. In fact, I'm going to show you some models that are showing this thing making a landfall. So that would be, I'm not exactly sure where. This thing is predicted by several models to make a turn to the left. That would be south, and then go north. And it really hasn't gone left yet. No guarantees that it's going to. It could go straight north. But I at least want to show you the things that I've been looking at in case you live here. Just know that there is a chance that this thing could come into the coast, or at least come very close. So we'll have to wait and see. And that could be as a Category 2, Category 3. I don't know. This thing's been predictable, but yet unpredictable. You know, it's like any other hurricane. They're all unique. But this one's been exceptionally unique. And it did sneak in front of the main dust layer from Africa. I'll show you that here in just a second. Okay, I'm back. I'm sorry. I had to do something real quick. All right, we're going to come back to this radar. And I did have some things over here that showed me that there were multiple structures washed away on the far west end of the Bahamas. Very rough situation over there. In fact, it's very reminiscent of Hurricane Matthew back in 2016. They still, well, most of it had been recovered until now. But here's the storm at Null School. Here's the thicker SAL. It's called the Saharan air layer, this dust. It's exceptionally dusty this year like it was last year. In fact, this is supposed to be blue. That's a lot of dust. This storm started out down here just south of Puerto Rico, just ahead of this dust. See that dust right there? There's not going to be any hurricanes in there. It's too dusty. The storms can't reach up through that. So it, prohibits the formation of these things. You can see where this is at right now. It's cleared itself out a pretty good path. Actually, Aaron cleared it out, and then it came on up through. Even though Aaron wasn't down here, there wasn't much dust down here by Puerto Rico. So this thicker dust here, even if there are some storms or tropical waves that are being monitored down in this area here, as long as the dust is that thick, honestly, I've never seen one form in those stable air conditions. It just doesn't. It's just not conducive for the formation of tropical cyclones. It's just not. And it's not rocket science. Now over here in the southern Caribbean, there could be something happening here. You can see there's not much Saharan dust there. Over here, this little storm here, that's Juliet. It's not going to do anything. The trade winds are going to make sure of that. And then if it gets any farther north, the waters are too cool. So it's not going to do anything. In fact, there's been a huge uptick globally. You can see all across the northern hemisphere. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. One major, a minor, and then 2 tropical storms. 3 areas that they're watching. This one here might have a chance to do something, even though it is way out here in the far eastern Atlantic Ocean. There's not a whole lot of dust there right now, but that could change tomorrow. This system here is kind of in front of and above the thick dust, so it might have a chance. And there's the one that I just spoke of in the southern Caribbean, just off the Mexico, Yucatan. That one definitely has a chance to do something. Is it going to be a major storm? Nobody knows at this point, but right now, that's just something that they're keeping an eye on right there. So it's very, very early. In fact, I think it's only been on there for less than 24 hours, to be honest, but been a huge uptick in tropical storms just in the last 36 hours. Back to the radar, the icons, there were a lot of them right here. In fact, there were so many. I don't know why they took them off. It just kind of recycled and they went away. But there were so many here. They were stacked on top of each other, on top of the western Bahamas. And I'm going to go there now on Google Earth, and you can see that there's still damage from Hurricane Matthew. I'm going to show you where we're at. This is where the storm is basically sitting right now. I'm going to turn on the weather feature. I'm on Google Earth. And there's the eye wall right there. And see the outer bands are touching Florida. So a little slight jog to the left. And then if this thing decides to go north, then you're looking at a potential landfall. If this thing just decides to start drifting north right now, you've still got the entire left side of this storm system touching the Florida coast, the Georgia coast, the South Carolina coast, could impact in South Carolina. Some models are showing that. A slight impact in South Carolina. Not a direct, but maybe an indirect landfall. Same way in the Outer Banks of North Carolina. So nobody's out of the woods yet. Georgia, in the Savannah area, this storm could go up into there. It could go up into Jacksonville. There's still a lot of unknowns. The storm is going to aesthetically get larger as we move forward in time, which means the tropical storm force winds and rain are going to cover a larger area. The storm's going to get bigger, not necessarily stronger. It's going to get aesthetically bigger. You can see it's gotten bigger already. Look how wide this thing is. In fact, let's just measure it real quick. I haven't measured it. I have no idea. I guess about 400 miles. Actually, 540 miles wide right now from outer band to outer band, going from north to south. So that's 540 miles. So let's measure it tomorrow. We'll see how wide it is. It's probably going to be over 600 miles wide. So that means left of center, it's going to cover 300 miles wherever this eye wall decides to go up the coast. It's going to cover 300 miles inland with rain bands and high winds. Not necessarily hurricane force winds, but high wind gusts. So we could see a lot of power outages between the states of Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, possibly even Virginia. I mean, it's still early. And this thing is supposed to linger around until Thursday. Are you serious? 4 days. That reminds me of, right there, there's what you're looking at back in 2016. Hurricane Matthew did almost the same exact thing back in 2016. And the damage that we were looking at right there, hurricane warning, this is from 2016, Hurricane Matthew. That's what that screenshot is. That's not this storm. Here's Dorian. That's a map from 2016. I want to go back to Google Earth, and I want to show you what we were looking at on Google Earth. There we go, right here. Let me take off the weather feature. And that eye wall's been there all day. It's just unbelievable. And this is the area where it said structures were washed away. And more than likely, these here, can't confirm that, I don't know. All it said was in this area, structures had been washed away or damaged, roofs taken off. And you can see blue tarps and a lot of roof damage when this photo was taken after Hurricane Matthew went through the area. Look at that. In fact, some of these structures right here, no roof. Completely gone. That's courtesy of Hurricane Matthew 2016. Here's another one. No roof. That was a very large structure. Completely gone. Look at these here. Looks like they've been through a tornado. And I think when Matthew went through there, it was a major hurricane. I don't remember if it was a 3 or a 4. I think it was on the verge of becoming a Cat 4 because the water's just so incredibly warm there. And that's what I'm saying. As Dorian moves to the west or even slightly northwest, these waters here are relatively shallow. It's going to be moving into deeper waters, but they're still very warm. So, especially through here, wow, those waters are like bath water, and they're shallow. So, a lot of these dunes that you can almost see out here off the north coast of the Bahamas, when I said there was earth changes underway, I literally meant literal earth changes. This storm sitting here for hours and hours on end, winds of even 80, 90, 100 mile an hour at ground level. A lot of those high-end winds that you've been hearing about are up in the upper levels, okay? Yeah, there may have been some 180 mile an hour gusts down at the ground level here and there. Maybe 100 mile an hour sustained, 120. But even at 80 and 90 mile an hour for 24 hours, it's going to change the geography a little bit. So I guarantee you there's probably some more new little islands around here. Some older ones probably got washed away or actually reconfigured. They may have to redo the map. They probably had to after Matthew in some areas. I don't know. But I can tell you this image on Google Earth, you can see several homes had their tarps. In fact, that roof right there has considerable damage. A lot of tarps on roofs in this area from Hurricane Matthew. And this storm, Dorian, is and still there, stronger than Hurricane Matthew. And we all know what Matthew did. Matthew didn't make a landfall. Matthew became a very large storm like this one's probably going to do. There's no guarantees. But Matthew created a lot of inland flooding. And it didn't make a direct landfall. It just barely touched the coast of Florida. And I think that's what this one has a pretty good chance of doing. Pretty much the same thing or in the same arena as a Hurricane Matthew. So if you guys are familiar with Matthew and what it did back in 2016, probably going to see somewhat of a repeat of that. And I think that's why they're calling for the majority of these evacuations Out of South Carolina, they're already evacuating people out of South Carolina, and the storm's not supposed to be up there for another 2 or 3 days. And at that, it'll be a much weaker system. It certainly won't be a Category 5, but they saw flooding in Georgia and parts of South Carolina when Hurricane Irma went through, and Irma wasn't even anywhere near South Carolina. So we'll have to wait and see what this storm does. It's showing some signs of weakening right now. The eye wall could be going through a replacement cycle. I don't know. Like I said, it's done that before, but the Bahamas, honestly, they're changed forever after this storm. Literally changed the Bahamas forever. Right through here, all of that, not all of it, but a big part of it's going to see some new features, and some of the structures. In fact, a lot of the structures on the land have been damaged in some degree, whether it be complete loss or like we're seeing in these pictures from Hurricane Matthew. In fact, here's another picture up close. All that damage you see right there, that roof right there on the right is completely gone. Hurricane Matthew, all of this. These rooftops over here on the right, all completely gone. Hurricane Matthew. All of this damage. You can see boats washed around up here in backyards, front yards, out by the road. That was from Matthew. Got another picture. And Dorian went through the same area as a stronger, much stronger hurricane. Look at this area here. Just completely, look at that. You can tell it was heavily flooded and high winds. I mean, that's a classic hurricane signature right there. That roof is showing severe damage. It almost looks like a tornado went through there. Matthew was a very strong hurricane. I think it went through there as a Category 4. Here you can see the blue tarps. We've seen them many times after hurricanes make landfall. We saw them in the New Orleans area after Katrina. There were blue tarps for hundreds of miles looking down from satellites. But this is from Matthew back 3 years ago. This is the path. This is probably what we're going to see, almost not a carbon copy, because I think this storm, based off of the high pressures that are up here and over the states and over the Atlantic, are separating, and that's going to allow this system to be drawn up into the northern part of the United States and then out into the North Atlantic, where Matthew kind of stalled out offshore, and then it took off, or it fell apart, because the waters, as you get farther north, the waters get cooler, and then that is not conducive for the formation of or the maintenance of hurricanes. So look for this storm let's go back to the radar. If I can find it real quick. Here we go. I'm seeing more and more of the eye wall right up here. And when I can see more of the eye wall on this storm, on this radar, that means it's coming closer to the mainland. See that? We're seeing more of it now, even since I started this live stream. If I were not able to see any of that eye wall, that would tell us the storm is definitely moving to the north, and it's not yet. If we can see it on here, we are over here on the mainland looking out, and that means it's coming in our field of view. So that tells us that right now at, it's 3:48 Mountain Time. That means it's 6:48 on the East Coast. This storm is still moving towards the Florida coast. That could change in 20 minutes. It could change in an hour, But right now, this storm is still headed towards the U.S. mainland, and it's going to have a path probably similar to Hurricane Matthew that created a ton of inland flooding, especially storm surge. I think this storm system here could create a combination of both rain and storm surge, because it's going to be a little bit bigger than Matthew was, or quite possibly the same. But either way, it's definitely been one for the record books so far, and I don't think it's done yet. I saw where the U.S. Coast Guard got into part of the Bahamas to give some assistance, much needed assistance, to areas that were directly impacted by the eye wall of the storm. But that's all I've seen so far. There's not been much footage come out of the Bahamas, which is not a good sign. So that tells you that their power, communications are down, and probably a big part of the areas where the eye wall is still setting. Just an unbelievable scene right now in the Bahamas. Never seen anything quite like it. Unbelievable. Let me go to... I want to show you some models that are showing a potential landfall with this thing. We're going to keep an eye on this radar because the more of the eye wall we can see on this radar, that means the closer it's getting to the coast of Florida. But again, and there's no guarantee it's going to make a landfall, but it is getting closer. If I couldn't see it on that radar, that means that it's moving to the north. Let's take a look at, see this one here? It's showing basically stalled. In fact, it's been there for so long. And that eye wall, see how it's starting to get wobbly now? Means it's slowing down a little. Could be going through an eye wall replacement. As it's moving to the west, the water does get a little bit deeper between Florida and the Bahamas, but it's still warm in general. But when it stirs up the water, it actually cools the water down. So it kind of works against itself if it stays in one place too long, and that's what's going on here. It's mixing up that water. So the water, even though it's shallow, it's mixing it up to a point to where it's not as warm as it was when it first got there. So that's going to affect the performance of the system. Here is one of the ensembles that are showing some landfalls. See how it's making a turn to the left and then going in? Granted, there's not that many, but there are several. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 out of all of these ensembles. There are 8 that show a landfall in Florida, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 show a landfall in South Carolina, and looks like 2 or 3 show a landfall in Georgia. And these are just possibilities. This could change in an hour. And it's showing multiples very close to, or at least right along the edge of North Carolina. Very similar to Hurricane Matthew. So a lot of similarities to Matthew, but I wanted to share this with you guys because there are models that are showing a direct landfall and going inland. Multiple models are showing Central Florida. Is that guaranteed? No, it's not guaranteed by any stretch of the imagination. But the fact that remains that that is a run based off of what's going on up here, the steering currents. The steering currents, let me see if I can, it's not going to show it on the infrared, but there's a high pressure system here, and there's a high pressure system over here, and there's a low here, and in fact that low is kind of influencing Dorian right now. But there's a high pressure system out here, classic, it's not really a classic Bermuda high, but I do know a little bit about the highs and lows with regard to the weather. And this high is going to open up, or it's opening up right now, and that will allow this to be pulled up because you have counterclockwise motion of the cyclone and you have clockwise motion of the high, okay, and that's going to draw it up. But there's a low forming over here, and they all influence each other. So that's why this thing's kind of stalled right now. It doesn't know what it wants to do. But the longer it stays over the same location, yeah, the eye wall is going to become a little ragged because of what I explained earlier. The water is getting mixed up. It's like bathtub water. You know, but you mix it up, the cooler water on the bottom comes to the top. Okay, it's been in the same position. That's a 3-hour loop. Actually, no, that's longer than a 3-hour loop. Let me see what that is. That's 200 frames. Boy, that thing had... In fact, it just went backwards. Say what? Hold on just a minute. I just want to see how long this loop is. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, Oh, wow. Okay, this is a 16-hour loop. So what we're looking at is 16 hours of the eye wall, essentially in the same exact place. No wonder the eye wall is falling apart. And it did just move backwards. Did you see that? It wobbled backwards. Watch. Barely moving. Unbelievable what's going on in the Bahamas. Yeah, the eye wall is wobbling. It'll be interesting to see what it does when it moves away from the Bahamas. It'll probably, I don't know, it's hard to say. You can see right there the eye wall is very stable, and right around there it starts to get wobbly. Almost looks like a replacement cycle. It's because it's been over the same water for the long duration. These things like to move generally, and they're steered by the upper level atmospherics, upper level highs, the mid-level highs, and then there's low pressure systems. They all influence one another. And there is something over here in the lower Caribbean that could turn into a tropical storm of some sort in the next day or two. We'll have to wait and see. But you can see it tried to move north there and it came back. That's why we're able to see it on that local radar I have out of Miami. And the more we can see it on that, the closer it's coming to Florida. All right, one more time. Here we go. Then it goes back and then forward. Boy, that is weird. I mean, it's just stuck. Unbelievable. Over here at windy.com, very reliable source for hurricane and weather data in general. Very good. And you can see Wendy's got it right there, the same place I had it on the GO 16. This one here that I just showed you, that's the GO 16. And this is the infrared satellite loop. And I use this a lot. In fact, I use it all day long on one of my devices. I don't stare at it all day long, but I have it running all day long. I look at the global infrared of the Earth, and I see where the storms are happening and not happening. And it's a very good tool if you like to study the weather patterns of Earth. Windy is a very good tool, and it's showing Windy. Let's walk Windy through. Windy's showing at least the latest run. I don't know when it was updated last. You can see it's wobbling because it's slowed down so much, and it's coming right next to the coast, and that would be near Cape Canaveral between Palm Bay and Daytona Beach. Not necessarily making a landfall by this model, but what it does, how they come at that solution right there, is it's a combination of all of these. So they just simply go down the middle. You see what I mean? They're not going to lean too far to the left. They're not going to lean too far to the right. In fact, that one right there, it's already past that. So that ensemble model is no longer applicable, really. It's already past that. So it's going to lean more towards something in the center or something to the left, because it's already past that area. It can't do that anymore. I mean, I suppose it could. It'd be kind of weird, but it's just kind of sitting there right now. But the models are showing it possibly coming inland. But back to Windy. Windy shows it splitting these right down the middle for the most part. Okay, shows it coming very close to, I think that's in the Titusville area, Cocoa Beach. Coming very, very close, causing a lot of storm surge, especially in that area. And this is going to push water up into Georgia, South Carolina. This is the European model. There's a European and a GFS that are the two main ones that people focus on, and they're both generally pretty good, especially when it gets down into the final 36 hours of a storm or whatever. But it's a combination, of all of the data. It's not just one ultimate source. It's a combination of all of it. It's a combination of all the ensemble models. But you can see this one's showing a very close encounter with South Carolina, but that's not until Thursday, and wind speeds of still well over 100 miles an hour. And the reason for that, You got to keep in mind, down here, it was a very high-end Category 5 storm. The reason it's looking a little ragged right now is because it's been in the same place for so many hours. Once this thing starts taking off again and the atmospherics become different or more stable, let's say with regard to wind shear. In fact, let's take a look at the wind shear. And that's probably what they're factoring in, wind shear and different waters. The waters down here, like I said, it's got the waters stirred up to where they've changed temperature. They're not as warm as they were in that area because of the storm. In fact, they probably cooled off 5 or 6 degrees, but this is one of the latest models that show the storm still setting over the Bahamas, which we're very familiar with that, but it shows a path splitting the middle of all of the ensemble models, but some are still showing it coming inland. Again, not guaranteed, but it's a possibility. Just need to be ready just in case it does. And if it doesn't, hey, that's great. We don't want it to. It's already done enough. That eye wall is looking like that because of the stalled location. That's exactly why. At least that's my opinion. It doesn't like the water that it's in, so it's gone from a Cat 5 to a Cat 4. We'll probably go to a Cat 2 by the time it gets up to the coastline, would be my guess. Maybe not. It could strengthen. Let's go to the visible. We'll see how tall this thing's looking. It might be going through a replacement, eye wall replacement cycle. It's difficult to tell because you can still see all the way to the ocean. Huh. Wow. Unbelievable. You're looking at the visible. In fact, I'll zoom in a little closer if I can. There you go. And we'll look down in this thing. And this is right before the sun is going to set out east. And you can see it's still reaching up in the atmosphere pretty tall. You can see the shadows on the eye wall, the shadow on the left. The sun is setting on the left, light on the right of the eye wall. So it's still pretty tall. Not as tall as it was, though. So that's a good thing. But aesthetically, the storm's going to get wider. It's going to get bigger, which means it's going to put rain farther inland as it moves up the coast. It's still going to have significant storm surge along the coast, inland flooding, much like that of, I know I'm being repetitive, but just in case some people are just joining, it's going to be very similar to a Hurricane Matthew, and that's what we're looking at here. This is Matthew from 2016. Matthew came up a little further from the south, much like Dorian did, but Dorian came on the east side of the Bahamas, and Matthew came up on the west side. That's all. That's basically the only difference, and Dorian's much stronger. Actually set a record. Strongest hurricane ever recorded in the eastern Bahamas, and it's going to come very close to the coast, much like Matthew did. It may not touch the coast. Matthew almost did, essentially did, but didn't make a landfall. Went right up the coast. What you're looking at is the path of Matthew from 2016, and this one's going to have something very similar. Looking at the eye wall again here on the infrared. Let's go in closer. In fact, yeah, it's going to balloon out. It's going to get bigger, guys. It's going to get wider. It's going to cover a much wider area, but not necessarily as strong. Oh, there's a new update. So this is new. I'm doing this in real time, guys. I just updated this. Oh, it's got many more models. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those are more up in the northern part of Florida now. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 6 now showing a landfall in the north part of Florida, near the Jacksonville area. Look at that. Doesn't say when. That would be somewhere around Tuesday night or Wednesday near northern Florida. That's been updated. And this thing is leaning left. I'm telling you, it's leaning left. There's more models showing an inland movement with this thing. So be ready, guys. And even in the Carolinas. This thing's showing a left-leaning personality. No joke. Oh my. So guys, I know you're ready. If you're watching this video and you live in Florida, you've been ready. You don't need me to tell you. But don't be surprised if that thing doesn't make a landfall. It very well could. And that's what here we're at the National Hurricane Center, and see what I mean? This is a pretty much, that's Matthew, and that's Dorian. You know, they're on the same track pretty much. But Dorian models are still leaning left. And the longer this thing sits here, you know, it could decide to come inland. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. But I know if you're watching this video, you're ready. They've got also, I saw hundreds of linesman trucks stationed, I think, in Georgia, ready to come down into Florida and Georgia, much like they did during Hurricane Irma. And they got the power back on very, very quickly. I was in Hurricane Charlie way up here in Orlando in 2004, and the electricity was out for a month in some areas because they weren't prepared for an Orlando destination with Hurricane Charlie. And there hadn't been a hurricane make landfall in the Orlando area in many, many, many years. So that created an environment for a lot of power outages because of tree growth. There were so many trees that had gotten so big over the years that they easily went into the power lines. Let's look at power outages real quick. So far, so good. Florida 6,400. That's the only thing associated with the storm right now. And that could be not related to the storm. I don't know. Let's click on it and see if it shows us on the map. In fact, that's over north of Tampa. So that's more than likely not even associated with Hurricane Dorian for now. Not exactly sure what's going on up in North Dakota. I think they've got some storms rolling through the area up in North Dakota. In fact, there's 12,000 without power up there. That must have been a heavy storm right there. Look at that. 12,000 without power in North Dakota? That's pretty rare. In fact, let's go back to, sorry guys, I just want to see what's going on up there. There's North Dakota. We're at the Go 16. What's going on in North Dakota with our friends? Ah, right there. Oh my. Big storm, and that's the area right there. See, we can relate that to power outages. Same exact location. That's where the storm reached its peak. 10,000 people right there in that county alone. So that could have produced a tornado. I don't know. Wow, that's a lot of power outages, though. I don't normally see that many in North Dakota. Even though they have their fair share of storms, don't generally see that many power outages in North Dakota. Real-time lightning map. We're here at the website. And you can see the majority of the lightning globally looks like it's in North America, extending from Canada all the way down to Central America. Look at that. Southern Mexico. A lot of lightning, and not really a whole lot coming from the Bahamas. We've got, look at that storm up in North Dakota. Are you serious? Look at that. Oh my, I wonder what happened up there. Anybody on here from North Dakota? Wow. That was a wild storm. Look at that lightning. Sorry, guys, I just noticed that. Thank you, Patrick. I'm sorry, guys. I'm so focused on these maps. Thank you, I am. I just saw these. Thank you, C. Anand. I appreciate that. You guys are very kind. I just happened to notice the power outages up in North Dakota. It looks like it extends over into northern Minnesota. They have had their share of storms this year. Now look down here off the coast of Florida and the Bahamas. You don't really see a whole lot of lightning right now associated with Dorian. Not much at all. Now you're seeing some activity over here in the southern Caribbean where there might be a storm brewing, but that storm up there has 12,000 people off the grid. Just happened within the last hour. So there's some activity there. Don't know if that's related to Dorian. Probably not. But you're not seeing a whole lot of electricity, at least with regard to lightning, from Hurricane Dorian right now. But it's leaning left, guys. It's leaning closer to the coast. It's stalled right now above the Bahamas. The reason this storm, like I said, was able to form was because it got out in front of. In fact, the dust is a lot thinner than it was back at, say, the 1st of August, especially during June and July. June 1st, that dust layer just took off, and it just swarmed, especially across the Atlantic. There were plumes that thick right there all across the Atlantic. And it was very quiet in June with regard to storms. In fact, I think there was a small one that formed close to the mainland only because there wasn't a whole lot of dust. Then once the dust consumed the mid-Atlantic especially, and the MDR, that's the main development region coming off the west coast of Africa, well, the storms would come off of the west coast of Africa, storms that would have potential to become hurricanes, and they'd run into that dust layer and just fizzle out. They would just simply fizzle out. They could not reach up high enough into the atmosphere. These storms like to reach up high. This storm here, Dorian, at one time was up near 50,000 feet tall. 50,000 footer. It's not right now, but that doesn't mean once it gets into fresh water, new water, that it won't re-strengthen. Keep an eye out for that. The reason this thing is starting to slow down a little bit is because it's been stuck over the same spot for nearly a day. So once it gets over to warmer waters, don't be surprised if this thing doesn't increase just a little. It wouldn't surprise me a bit, because it's looking for warmer water. Even though it's in warm water, it's been stuck in the same place too long. So it's starting to lose some of its momentum. Now it's going to take off north at some point. That all of the models are in agreement. It's just when. When is it going to go north? How close is it going to get to Florida? You're looking at the model here from the National Hurricane Center, and they're saying it's going to get pretty close. Not as close as Matthew, but they're taking all of the ensemble models data and they're going right down the center. But the cone, you can see their cone does go onto the coast, right near it, you know. So, but their main model goes right down the center of all of the ensemble models, like you see right there. So it's a collective effort. But this just changed, and it did show some of the models also leaning left. So just be ready. And like I said, I know you guys watching, you are ready. You just want to know, you're like me, okay, is this thing going to make landfall as a Category 4? I mean, that's a big deal. If it makes landfall as a Category 3, that's a big deal. It went through the Bahamas as a Category 5 and now a Category 4. That's a big deal. You know, any major hurricane's a big deal, especially when it comes in contact with populated areas. You know, if they're out in the ocean, not bothering anybody, we've seen that before, it's no problem. It's just part of the mechanics of our planet. But when they come in contact with populated areas, like especially here in the Bahamas, where those people didn't have anywhere to go, they didn't have anywhere to go. I mean, I feel terrible for those people there. So the storm, it's just stuck right now in the same area. When will it go north? The models are implying that it's going to go north at some point. They all agree on that. It's just when. But there are some guys that have this thing leaning left in the next 24 hours, leaning left towards land, and that would be much different than Hurricane Matthew. Not by a whole lot, but when you're talking, 10, 20 miles of movement this close to land, that's a big deal. That makes a big difference. If it was way out here in the ocean, 10 or 20 mile variance to the left or to the right, it's not a big deal. But when you're already talking about it hugging the coast, a 10-mile adjustment to the left is a big deal. Even a 10-mile adjustment to the right, that's a big deal. That's going to put it farther away from land. So that would mean less impacts with regard to storm surge, high winds. There's going to be at least tropical storm force winds. If it comes closer, if it goes inland as a Category 2, well, then I've been in a Category 2 storm. I know what it does. I stood right out in the middle of Hurricane Charlie as it went over. When it went through, I didn't know. But when the eye wall went right over my head, yeah, I went out and looked. I could look right up through the eye wall. And the reason I did it is because I knew I would probably never be in another one again. And in fact, I ended up being in 2 more that year. So I was in Francis and I was also in Jean. And they both went, Francis went right over my head right there in the Orlando area. Francis was a gigantic storm that came in from the Atlantic and slowly, it took 36 hours to cross, and it went from the Atlantic to the Gulf as a gigantic storm. It wasn't necessarily the strongest storm. I think it was a Cat 1, maybe a Cat 2, but it was the size of Texas. It was just huge, and it was nonstop, steady winds sustained of probably anywhere from maybe 50 mile an hour. But Hurricane Charlie had come through like 3 weeks prior and had, knocked everything loose that was going to be knocked loose because it had winds of 100. So when Francis come through, it didn't really do a whole lot of damage because Charlie had already taken care of all that. So I did get to see a second Hurricane Francis. And like I said, it was just a big, slow-moving storm. Wasn't as strong as this one here, though. This one's actually moving slower as it stalled. Francis was never stalled, but it just sat out here and just kind of, I don't know, I think at one point it was at 2 mile per hour, and then it came across just like that, moving at around 3, maybe 4 miles per hour. I was right in the middle of it. Charlie came up this way, was supposed to impact Tampa Bay, and then at the last minute it made a right-hand turn in the Fort Myers area. Was a total surprise. So these things do have, even though we have some very sophisticated equipment, these things still have an unpredictable side to them. Charlie went right up here and came up into Orlando as a Cat 2. Nobody dreamt that in their wildest dreams. It was supposed to go into Tampa and then up to Jacksonville, not Punta Gorda and Orlando. And people evacuated from Tampa to Orlando to avoid the storm. What'd they do? They evacuated Tampa and went right into the storm. So that's what I'm saying. These things have an unpredictable side. That was in 2004. Granted, the equipment and the predictive models are much more accurate today than they were, 15 years ago. I get that. But still, you're dealing with Mother Nature, and it does have an unpredictable side to it, these models are very, very good. In fact, they're super impressive, I gotta admit. But they're still, unpredictable. They can be. And this one here, they did predict it, though, a couple of days ago, that this thing would reach a point where it would almost come to a standstill. And it was exactly right. It's at a complete standstill. So the models are very, very good. But right now, some of them are starting to show. Because, see, here's the thing. The longer this thing sits in the same place, 2 things are going to happen. One, you're seeing on the satellite, and I just showed you what that eye wall was doing. It's starting to wobble because the water is getting cooler, okay? And then number 2, the longer it stays in one location, that means more time for these upper steering currents to change their mind. So if this thing wants to sit here for another day, well, then this high pressure system over here and this low down here are going to have a completely different personality, which is going to give this thing a completely different personality. It could back up and go back out into the ocean. But based off of the current position of the high pressure systems and the low pressure systems around this thing that are steering it, if it's going to move north, it's going to have to do it real soon. Or it could be moved into another direction. That's all. And going back to this radar loop, let's see if we can see more of the eyewall. Yes, we can see more of the eyewall. Right there it is. See it? So if it moves into this radar's field of view, that means it has to be moving to the west because we're west. Okay, we're west of the storm. If it starts to move out of the field of view, then we know for sure that it started its north journey. And all of the models are telling us it's going to go north. Just don't know when. But this here is a very good tool to tell us that this thing is moving to the west. And right there it is. There's more of it visible now. There's more visible now than there was when I started this video. See it right there? That's westward movement. The eye wall starting to get kind of rough looking because it's in the same water it's been in for, what, nearly 20 hours now? These things like to tear a patch through warm waters, fresh warm water. So don't be surprised once it does start moving if it doesn't gain a little bit of strength. It could. It very well could if it gets into some fresh warm water. Absolutely. Thank you, Mog. Street Sweep. Thank you all for joining. I just looked over. We got 2,800 people. And you guys are curious about the storm, you know, just like I am, you know, we all are. We've been watching this thing for days. And, you know, honestly, I was very surprised that this storm, as a tropical storm down around Puerto Rico, as it went wide of Puerto Rico, which I was very glad to see. They didn't need any action. They don't need any action down there for a long time. But I was glad to see it go wide. But when it strengthened, I'm like, wow, you know, I got to admit, you know, based off of its location, I knew it had a chance to, but I was a little bit surprised. I'm not going to say I wasn't. I was a little bit surprised, but it was out ahead of the dust. It was definitely ahead of the dust. If this were sitting back here, it wouldn't be. No, there's no way that could work there. It's just not in the mechanics of these storms. They don't like that stuff. They like nice, clear air where they can reach up. In fact, that's something I wanted to look at. Let's look at we want to look at the wind shear right now. Maybe the wind shear is influencing this. There is a little bit of wind shear. See the red lines above the center of the eye wall? See that red line? That's 25 wind shear. That's not super strong. It goes up to 70 or 80. But still, favorable conditions are green lines. That's wind shear. Unfavorable are the red lines. See what I mean? For hurricanes and typhoons, tropical storms, when you see the red lines, that means conditions are not necessarily favorable for typhoons, cyclones, and hurricanes, okay? But down there, see that green? That's a favorable condition. That's wind shear. That's what it likes. It likes the green. So it's going to run into some red, even though it's not all that strong. 25, 30. Like I said, it can go up as high as 80. I mean, I've seen it at 80 before, and those conditions make the storm lean over because it's running into upper level winds. So these things like to stretch up high into the atmosphere. So conditions are not that unfavorable right now, but all of that will change. Those are currents, upper level wind currents. As this thing moves up towards the Carolinas and Georgia and North Florida, those wind currents are going to change. The atmospheric conditions are going to change that steer this thing. So that's probably why some of these models have this thing making a left hand, just sliding to the left a little bit. And you can see the cone definitely implies that. See the yellow? The yellow goes all the way across, cleared north to North Tampa. So anywhere in that cone, there's a yellow line there, and then there's one way over here, are actually within the realm of possibility. So it could go anywhere in that. And that's a wide cone. Because this thing is still relatively unpredictable. Even with all the sophisticated instruments, I mean, it's a very high octane form of nature. 926 millibars, 944. I'm just looking at the intensity models from ADT, SATCON, and MSU. So it's right around 940 millibars. That's a very strong storm. No doubt about it. Let's look at the convergence. And we're going to look at divergence. Yeah, I mean, that's... Oh, wow. That's strong. That's vorticity. See the vorticity? That's at 300. That's still a high-end storm, guys. So, yeah, don't let your guard down, especially if you're along the coast of Florida. Georgia, South Carolina. Doesn't look like it's going to cross and go into the Gulf. At one point, models were suggesting that it could cross the state of Florida, which I've been in a storm like that. Hurricane Francis crossed the state of Florida and went up into the Gulf. So this storm, at one time, that's what the models were implying. Crossing the peninsula, going into the Gulf. And since then, they've all swung back to an Atlantic side storm, going up the coast, much like Hurricane Matthew of 2016. So it's going to be very similar to that, guys, either way, unless it makes a landfall. And again, I don't know. We're just watching really close on this right here. And the more of this eye wall, I can see more of it now. And see, this updates like every 4 minutes or something. So I get fresh data on this, all the time. And I'm seeing more of the eye wall on this side over here. So that tells us it's kind of leaning to the left. So it hasn't started its north journey yet. But there was some data on here earlier that's since, like I said, recycled off. If you were not with us when I started the live stream, there was some data on here showing that there were buildings and structures washed away on the far west end of the Bahamas, which, it's understandable considering there's been a Cat 4, Cat 5 in that vicinity for the better part of, 36 hours now in this area. Time we factor in all of the Bahamas. Let's see if I can get the weather feature to come back on. There it is right there. Okay, and then we zoom in. That storm up in the Dakotas, there it is right there. Let me go up here just real quick. Wow, that's a strong storm. I mean, that even looks strong on here. You can tell it's a tall storm. Wow, that's got 12,000 people without power. That storm right there. I mean, that's, if you look at it aesthetically, it's almost as big. Let's just measure it for fun here real quick. We'll go north to south. Well, actually, we'll go south, north. Let's just measure it. That's 375 miles wide. That's the storm that just went through North Dakota. And we know this storm here is 450 miles wide. But I wanted to go back into this area here. See, the outer bands are touching Florida already. Look at that. And it's only going to get larger. It's going to get aesthetically larger. But the Bahamas have been in this storm for probably what feels like infinity. Unbelievable. But you can still see on Google Earth the remnants from, that's tarp that they've had to put on these structures. That was from 2016 Hurricane Matthew. You can see a lot of debris still around, rooftops completely missing if you go here to the far western Bahamas. And that's where Hurricane Matthew went through. Very strong storm. I think it was a Category 4 when it went through here. But as I was saying earlier on this instrument here, it was showing that there were structures that had washed away from probably storm surge, quite possibly wind damage, because this was a very strong, and still is a very strong storm that has been there for a very, very long time. But you're seeing the outer bands reach the eastern coast of Florida. I'm starting to see this eye wall, and if I can see it on here, I'm looking from the west, so that means it's moving to the west very, very slowly, albeit, but it's still moving to the west. It hasn't started its northward journey yet. So we're keeping a close eye on this, guys. If I see it getting any closer, I'll maybe do another live stream, because this is a big deal. We don't want to see it make landfall. But there's always that possibility, This thing has been what we call, or at least I call, an overachiever. I mean, it was a high-end Cat 5. Unbelievable. Those just don't come around very often, and we don't like to see them, but that's been the trend since 2017, Started, Irma, Maria, and then last year, Florence and Michael, and now this year, Dorian. So you're going to have 3 years in a row where you're going to have names retired. I don't think that's ever happened. 2017, they retired the names. They won't use them again for hurricanes. In case you didn't know, Irma, that won't be used as a hurricane name again, or Maria. Then last year, Michael and Florence were retired. They won't use those names anymore. Dorian will probably be taken out of the mix. They probably won't use that one either. So 3 years in a row. I don't know that that's ever happened, where 3 years in a row they've had multiple names retired. Unbelievable. So anyway, guys, we're keeping a close eye on Dorian as it's slowly, basically stalled over the northwestern Bahamas right now. Still, could come very close to the Florida shores. And I know if you guys are watching this video, you are ready. You've been ready, and that's good. Just be ready, and it's always better to be prepared and not need it than to be unprepared and need it. So I know you're prepared, you're anxious, you're waiting on this thing to do whatever, it's got to do. You're feeling the outer rain bands right now. I wish I could tell you what it was going to do, but I don't know either. All I can do is take a look at the models and the data based off of the steering currents up here in the upper atmosphere. And once again, the longer this thing stays in the same location, the bigger variances we can have in the outcome of this storm as far as where it's going to go. So if it's going to get going, it needs to get going like now. Whether it's west or north, it needs to get going north, because the longer it sits there, the more that these upper level winds are going to change, because they change every second. They're constantly in a state of motion. They're not going to sit around and wait on Dorian. They're going to do what they got to do. So once these currents change, then that's going to change the direction of the storm. So just prepare for a landfall. Hope it doesn't happen. That's the best advice I can give. But that storm is going through what appears to be an eye wall replacement. Let me go in tight. And there it actually kind of moved slightly to the left. Wow, what a bizarre storm. All right, guys, I'll keep you updated if anything changes. Like I said, I'll be watching this very, very closely, and if the more of that eye wall that I can see, then I know it's moving west. But right now, it's essentially stalled over the northwestern Bahamas. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a super day, and be safe out there.